And every other month, we have planned this new online series, which I'm very excited about. We will be comparing other forms of multimedia with Kamishibai throughout the year. So Jill has very generously offered to do our first in this series with Crankies versus Kamishibai. I will be doing picture books versus Kamishibai in April. We have Cartonera, which is a Latin American, not just picture book, but handmade book format versus Kamishibai in June. And then we will have in August, Mary Sharp, who often joins us. She will be looking at puppetry and Kamishibai. She's doing a really interesting project where she actually kind of alternates between the two. And we will have film versus Kamishibai with Natsu Onoda Power, who's a very interesting performer and artist from Japan, but working at Northwestern University in the US. And then we will have magic versus Kamishibai, which I think is a great contrast and lots of interconnection there. But today, Jill Webster, storyteller and cranky artist and Kamishibai artist, will be sharing her experience of both of these formats. I'm going to let her introduce herself, and I will spotlight her for everybody and spotlight her slides as well. If I can figure out how to do that. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Yes, well, hello everybody. I'm Jill Webster and I have the privilege of coming to you from Darug country in the lower Blue Mountains of Australia. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging who have kept the traditions, culture and stories alive, and long may that continue. And I am first and foremost a storyteller, and secondly, I am a maker of things. I've often used puppetry in my work and I like making quirky props and things. I'm not a historian and I'm not a visual artist. However, we're going to be going into a bit of a history of Crankies and, to give you a bit of context, because really I'm coming at this today in a very practical way. I want to talk about the differences between the two forms as a maker and as a performer and as somebody who loves stories. So yeah, I've been interested in Kamishibai for many, many years, and I've always had this cranky technique in the back of my mind from a theatre background. But it was only during lockdown that I really got serious about doing. And that was because I watched my children homeschool and I watched them get inspired by people online having these amazing how-to videos and these child geniuses coming with the amazing output. But I watched them look at that and partly be inspired, but actually often feel blocked because what they were seeing was so perfect and so polished that they felt stupid and foolish when they were beginners and bad. And I was trying to encourage them to do something that was imperfect. Just because something is imperfect, it doesn't mean it has no worth. And then I thought about what was stopping me from doing Kamishibai and doing Crankies, and it was exactly the same thing where I was worried about being perfect and fantastic instantly. And I decided I had to lead by example. So I got into making Crankies and started my journey that way. And in much more recent times, I've gotten into actually finally doing Kamishibai. So the plan for today, very quickly, is we're going to do a little overview of the history of Crankies. A lot of the people in the audience here at the World Kamishibai Forum are already quite aware of Kamishibai. So I'm going to look at the history of Crankies because I think what has fed into Crankies really is something that influences the form itself. Then Tara's going to have a little hello and talk about the Japanese form of scroll storytelling. And then we're going to do a how to make a story scroll with Cranky Duck. Cranky Duck, it's a very simple little scroll, but we're going to stop and start it because I'm going to talk about, this is going to be the makers section where I'm really going to talk about making the decisions you make as a scroll maker versus the decisions you make as a story card maker. And then I'm going to do some little performances. So you can see a cranky in action and you can see a work in progress Kamishibai story. And I've chosen this particular cranky because I think it works best in cranky form. And I've chosen this work in progress Kamishibai because I think it would be a terrible cranky. So you can sort of have an example of things that work best, what works better in each of these different forms. And then we'll have time, hopefully, for questions and further discussion that arises. We'll probably, if you feel free to put questions in the chat as you go, but I'll probably not be able to focus on that as we go and try and get to those at the end. But please don't let it stop you writing it into the chat so you can remember, we can get to it later. So here we've got a photo of the very lovely Sue Truman there with a contemporary cranky. So what is a cranky? A cranky is a moving panorama was another, or the original name for a cranky. It's a scroll storytelling technique. You have a box. Often it is a sort of a horizontal scroll where you crank a handle and it feeds the scroll through that front section of the screen and you tell the story as you go. Moving panorama was the original name, and you can see an old diagram of some of the mechanics there for an old one, and they could vary in size greatly, from tiny little toys that you might get in a watchmaker's to huge ones that were advertised being miles long. Now, I'm just trying to, there we go. Now, what led to the creation of the moving panorama was a fellow called Barker. And Mr. Barker was an Irish itinerant artist who found himself in Edinburgh. And there are two stories about the creation of what came before the moving panorama, which was just the panorama. And a panorama is a 360-degree view of a painting. You're basically in the middle looking at a painting that goes all the way around you. And Mr. Barker found himself in Edinburgh. Some say he was in the debtor's prison with time to think about what he might do. Others say he was walking the streets of Edinburgh under an umbrella in the 1790s. And he was looking at the spokes of the umbrella and he thought to himself, standing under the umbrella, I wonder if I could have a picture that I could see. I could stand in the middle of it and look at it before me all around. And so he, sorry, I'm just losing power here. And so Mr. Barker worked and started making these panoramic images. They started off quite small and got bigger and bigger as he floated stock in a company, because the thing with a panorama, this kind of visual spectacular, it needs its own building. It needs a whole building to house something that was as magnificent as Mr. Barker's vision. So you can see that's quite an expensive undertaking. And these buildings were created. They had to be made in centres of population. So London, they had one in Edinburgh, they had some in Paris, they even had one in Melbourne. They had these buildings that were custom built to house these giant images. And unlike theatre of the time, which was a little bit not very respectable, this was part of the high culture. You could come here and you were looking at visual arts. It was a more cultivated taste, highbrow. So it was quite respectable to come along and have a look at one of these things. It was a social occasion often. But the problem with a panorama is that it is a static building. And once everybody in London has seen the panorama 4 times, 5 times, well, then you have to make a whole new one. You've run out of audience. Make a new one, and it's a time-consuming and expensive thing. To find a new audience or to find more audiences. Oh, sorry, before I do that, I can see these. There are some panoramas that you can still see in different locations, in different museums. But if you look on the slide here, you can see there's a small slide with a black and white image with chunks missing. When storing these images, they were often rolled up, put away. They were often repurposed and cut up into bits. A lot of them were very, very damaged. And that is just the still panorama with the audience coming into the middle and looking at these views in the middle. You can imagine that crankies or moving panoramas, they are under that much more stress. So it is quite rare to find panoramas at all. But there are some places that you can find panoramas that you can visit to this day. But back in the day, back in the very early 1700s and really into the 1800s, it was an absolutely, there was a craze, a panorama craze. There were many different forms that borrowed the panorama, credit. There were dioramas and different forms that related to the moving panorama. But as a respectable thing to view, they were often informative. So you might be able to do a bit of a grand tour from the comfort of a church hall in your town centre, or in a London building, some of these still specifically built to house the moving panoramas. The subjects of these panoramas were often scenes that were travel. So you might have whaling journeys across the ocean, and there were times where they got very tricky and adventurous with trying to get new lighting techniques coming in, and thunders. So you might have an ocean storm. And everything that had an ocean voyage, inevitably you had some kind of storm at some point with thunder and lightning effects to get the excitement going. They might also be views from the top of a mountain. Mostly, again, they were horizontal, but there was a little fad at an exposition when hot air ballooning became a thing, and you might have vertical crankies to show the view that you were looking down upon. And it was a little bit like watching out of a carriage window, where you were watching scenery go by. So journeys were very much a part of this story. But it was also historic events. The Battle of Waterloo, for example, found its way as a moving panorama within a few months of the Battle of Waterloo. So people who were not there could see it. It was almost like an old newsreel. And there's a lovely book that's about Australian spectacular. They've called it canvas documentaries. So I think that's a fabulous phrase for some of these moving panoramas, canvas documentaries. But these things, these scenes, sometimes processions, like coronation processions, where you can see people wandering past, but really they were brought to life by a narrator. And over time, it started off being very much a lecture, and they were called the lecturer. The lecturer would talk about what you might see in the image and what was happening in the battle, or what was happening in the life of Napoleon, for example. There was often stories, scenes of a life that you might see flash before your eyes. And it became very much that the narrator, the lecturer, was responsible for a kind of patter. The circuit for touring moving panoramas, it stretched all over the place. It was based in the UK. There were many that went through different parts of Europe. They went to America very much, and they went to Australia as well, and other places, mostly English speaking, but not always. And then these countries often fed back. So you'd get views from Tasmania as a moving panorama scroll back in London. And there was a great touring area in America where the Americans would then come back to London, and where sometimes there are sort of snobbish voices in London saying, I don't know about the artistry, but his patter was absolutely top notch. He was so entertaining when he told us about these stories, and he might have had the pianoforte. Music was often a part to sort of relieve the monotony of sometimes a couple of hours of cranky watching or moving panorama watching. So music from quite early days was often used. The rousing battle scenes were aided perhaps by bagpipes and drums. So they went hand in hand. Here is an example of Mr. Banvard, and he is performing in this slide to Queen Victoria. And Mr. Banvard was one of these Americans who had an image of the Mississippi River. They joked there were lots of Mississippi River moving panoramas at one point, and they would joke that what you'd do is you'd watch the Mississippi on one bank going downstream at one session, and then the next session you'd watch going in the other direction, going upstream the Mississippi River. But you can see that's quite a large, he was famous for having quite large panoramas, and it wasn't quite 3 miles, but advertised as 3 miles. And very entertaining, and as you can see, right up to royalty. But there were many different scales of panorama, and as the years progressed, they went from being quite a high art form to being one that really toured all over. People would sell on their moving panorama scrolls to try and make as much money as they could, or if they wanted to retire. You had parlor panoramas, and they were a sort of a smaller side. You also got all sorts of special effects. Here you've got a diorama effect where you've got objects in front of the panorama, ships going one way while the scenery goes the other. There were horse race crankies where you had horses going and cranky going. There were, you can see fireworks, and this is from a short story with the Battle of the Nile, where a soldier wanted to get Napoleon this time and tried to use cannonballs, oranges as cannonballs. But eventually, other crazes took over. Magic lantern came in, photography came in. So when you were looking at trying to get a view of different places or different events, there were Civil War, American Civil War things. If you were trying to get accurate views of events, people started being able to go to photography and then to cinema. So this faded into being something that was used as a theatre trick. It became a part of operas or a part of ballets or a part of pantomimes especially, and really was relegated into scenes from the past. However, saying that, it's still very much in a more parlour panorama scale, an important part of storytelling these days. We've got the lovely Bronia Evers in the UK, who has recently been part of an exhibition of Crankies over there. Unfortunately, that's literally just finished, but she shared some photos on Facebook and online, so that's been very generous of her. And we have Shadow Crankies. We've got Wendy Dacre from the UK there, and we've got Catherine Fahey, and Catherine Fahey also speaks very much about being influenced by the Kamishibai Butai, or stage form, with her beautiful, beautiful work. A lot of these people will be using music, and some of the current cranky scene goes hand in hand with folk music and old-timey music. And it really does, it's a form that really does lend itself to collaboration with musicians. And Sue Truman is an amazing artist. I just wanted to show that you can make crankies out of lots of different materials. There's paper crankies, there are Tyvek, which is a kind of synthetic paper. Fabric here, you can see that she has quilted stories as well. She is also somebody behind the crankyfactory.com, which is an amazing website. And if you are looking for more information about making your own crankies, then this is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Now, what I've been talking about is really this very Western form of scroll storytelling, but I just wanted to remind everybody that scroll storytelling exists in many cultures across the world. This is an image of from Indonesia, Java, Wayang Beber. And in this kind of scroll storytelling, you have a wooden block with holes in it, which is a wonderful way of being able to quickly swap your story scroll, which is something that cranky practitioners often have difficulty with. I'm talking about myself here. You just slotted it in and told the stories that way. Often, again, with musical accompaniment, with gamelan orchestras and what have you. And you might have a dalang tell many scrolls. So you do this one scroll and then you'd swap over, and then the next scroll would come out and you'd do this one. An amazing art form. I don't know how often it is done these days. This is an image from 1900. In India, we've got Patachitra, and this is a very vibrant and still existing story form. And there are some lovely images in the Queensland Museum as well from different contemporary artists. This is a vertical scroll storytelling form, and they tell religious stories, which was something that Moving Panoramas and Crankies did as well, spiritual stories. And also they might be, the local news and these sorts of things. And we are now going to go to Tara. There are amazing Chinese story scrolls. There's scrolls from Korea, where you had, monks that might go from monasteries and share very spiritual stories using these visual backgrounds. But Tara, can I ask for you, please, to come along and give us a little insight into the Japanese form of story scrolls?
Yes, give me a moment to set it up. I'm going to do a very brief, just look at how this format developed in Japan. Let me get to the slideshow. So if any of you have been reading my various articles and books about Kamishibai, I do connect it to what is called the history of etoki. Kamishibai itself is not an ancient storytelling art form. It really started, the format we use today started in around 1930. But it is part of this long tradition that Jill is talking about, that really spans East and West, which is a kind of picture storytelling narration. And in Japan, this is called etoki. So the first examples of etoki really started in the Heian period. And here you can see the Tale of Genji, which was a literary piece of the Heian period by Murasaki Shikibu, a female artist. And here you see the aristocratic ladies, the woman in the center reading a text, and the other ladies, it's a little hard to see, but they're looking at images as she reads the text. And these are considered the earliest forms of etoki, or picture narrative, in Japan. Paper came from China. The legend has it in 610, a monk brought it to Japan, and it became very important in temples, and the aristocratic classes were able to access paper. But it took a very long time for it to be more available to other classes in society in Japan. So the first scrolls, or emaki, picture scrolls, that came from China inspired the Japanese to create similar scrolls. And it wasn't until the 10th century that they really came up with their own method of narrative picture scrolls. Another form of scroll storytelling, this is an example in the Muromachi period, the 14th century. You had the kumono bikuni or nuns, itinerant nuns who went around. And as you can see, it's very similar to what Jill was just showing us with a storyteller holding a stick to show different parts of the scroll. It's a little similar to what in Europe was called bankosang, I think, that where they had a whole scroll, hanging scroll, and pointed to different parts of the story as they were telling it. So this was another important form of scroll storytelling that's part of the etoki tradition. And I wanted to show you how these storytelling formats continue to be important today in Buddhist temples. On the right-hand side, you see a priest. And I love this. This is a really great example, I think, different from the Indonesian version, but still very simple, where you can put the scroll into a stand and just unravel it as you are telling it. So this kind of emaki or scroll is still used in temples today. And here he is telling very often in the temples, they tell the stories about how the temple came to be, the sort of legends and stories around the origins of the temple. And on the left, you have a female nun storyteller telling very similarly to the bhikkhuni of the 14th century, using a stick to show the different parts of the story on a hanging scroll. So these kinds of scroll storytelling is still practiced in Japan today and is really developed independently of the European models, but you can kind of see how a good idea in any part of the world independently can come up with something very similar. But Kamishibai really, if you look at different histories, and different people will argue that that is not the true precursor of Kamishibai. The true precursor of Kamishibai is early cinema, or the magic lantern, as Jill also mentioned. So the magic lantern entered Japan the early 1800s, probably just as maybe a diagram, or they may have had the instrument, but there was very little interaction with Europe at that time. Japan was cut off from the West. So they came up with their own version of the magic lantern, which was called Utsushie in the Edo period. And here you have an example of how it was performed. So it was very different from the European magic lantern because it was light. It was made out of wood, and people could hold the lanterns. And they had like a little film strip, an animated series of images that they would quickly put through the light source so you could see the animation. And it's really known as Japan's first animation. So this is the beginnings of Kamishibai, and we can see that in the way you pull the cards and the different techniques to create animation in the transitions between cards as they're pulled out of the stage. So I think Jill has some great examples to show that contrast in the sort of mechanics of it. But all of this is considered part of a larger tradition of picture narrative. And it's interesting to see Jill's examples of storytellers with their sticks showing, the scrolls, because it's almost the same, even though maybe there wasn't a direct influence in the early period. But they came up with similar methods of sharing picture stories.
Yes, it is interesting how some things feed off each other and some things really just develop independently of each other. But at the same time, I think it seemed to be a time of great experimentation, and what you could do with light became very influential, and partly to the demise of the moving panorama. Although they did often use some of those magic lantern techniques in conjunction with moving panoramas, and you had faded areas where you could project onto the back of the screen, and this sort of early shadow work too.
And I should just say that I think from 1868, when Japan opened to the West and Western style magic lanterns came to Japan, which were kind of like a completely separate, seen as a separate mechanism, then there was a lot of influence back and forth, and I'm sure the panoramas and different forms of cinema also was a great influence in Japan as well. I'm going to spotlight you again, Jill, so you can share your story with everybody. So there we go.
Excellent. So this was a little cranky that was made for an online thing. So it's quite small because small often works best online. Um, and it is a very simple construction. It is a box and some chopsticks, some pegs, some little milk carton lids on the bottom there to be feet, because you need your chopsticks to go through at the top and through at the bottom, at least something, so that it holds it in place up and down straight. But this is just, the box is an example of something you can play around with at home without having an investment in fancy materials at all. And yeah, so I'm going to do this. It was created just to talk about cranky scrolls, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about crankies and Kamishibai as we go. All right, this is the fabulous Cranky, how to make a story scroll with Cranky Duck. Now, when you are going to be doing your own Cranky, of course, the first thing you might want to do is think of a story. What story are you going to tell? And this is the same with Kamishibai. Some of the process is going to be very, very similar. Now, as you've seen, a lot of the earliest Crankies, they were about travel. So perhaps you have a journey that you've been on that you might want to make your own Cranky scroll, or perhaps you have a folk tale or legend that involves traveling, because something that Crankies do really well is going from place to place with a sense of movement. And in Kamishibai, you can get that sense of movement through the ways that you pull your cards. But I think it really, there's a gentle momentum that happens in Crankies, less so in Kamishibai. That could be controversial. Also, some of the stories were not just journeys through space, but also journeys through time. So perhaps you have reminiscences or things that happened in a life that you might think, how could I make this into a Cranky scroll, journeying through the development of somebody? And as we've heard as well, something else that lends itself really well to Crankies is music. Is there a ballad or a song, a children's song that you know? There's a rhythmicity to a Cranky that really seems almost like its own lullaby. It can be a very relaxing, chill kind of momentum. Now, once you have thought of what story you would like to do, it's time to get to work writing. Now, this might be a similar process for making a story scroll or for making a story card. What happens in this story? What are the scenes that I might depict? And I like to write the plot out or the story out. 1, 2, 3, 4, block, 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 block. Really, really simple. What are sorts of the things that I need to show in this story? What needs to be visually represented, and how might I visually represent it? And you can see a clear link in the process that you might do to make a story card or a series of story cards, because Kamishibai is cards in a sequence, much as this Cranky is in a sequence. But unlike Kamishibai, you might also think about, or you have to think about transitions. But the transitions in Cranky are constant and visible. Are there shapes that might appear in one image that transform and become something else in another? Does it help you to change perspective? In Kamishibai story cards, you might, to keep visual interest, have one where you zooming in using this language of cinema. You can really see the differences there. Zooming in to get a close-up shot in your story card. But you know, this can be a helpful tool of transitioning in Cranky as well. Suddenly we've got this person or the character at the front of the screen, and they can then hold something that takes us on and the next part of the journey. Now, you've got your story, you've chosen it to suit the medium, you've written out the point form, what happens, you've worked out how to depict that, how you might transition. Now, how do you make the pictures? Now, there are many different ways. You can draw it, you can paint it. If you're, need some technological help, perhaps you might do some things and then trace from a program as you go. When I first got into making Crankies, now I was very, very, as I said, very nervous. I'm not a visual artist. That is not my background. I make things. I'm happier making puppets, making objects. I'm not a visual artist, but I wasn't going to let it stop me, but I was also scared. So to begin with, my first Cranky was a poem, long out of copyright, a cautionary verse by Hilaire Belloc, and they were images that were also out of copyright. So I adapted images that already existed from an out of copyright work. I credited the author and the illustrator in the Cranky scroll and when I was talking about them. But I'm also pausing here. When I was making this Cranky, this is a bit of a difference. I literally got a piece of scrap from a bag and I cut a hole in it, the size of the frame here. When you are doing a Kamishibai, you have a story card and you sort of know that's the boundaries of what is visible. I tend to go, okay, well, there's a centimetre around every edge where you can't put anything important because it will be perhaps blocked by the butai, the stage. Whereas you don't easily have that same sense when you are making a long scroll. What is at the front? What is visible at any one time? So I definitely found it very helpful to get my little piece of scrap card and to use that on the scroll as I was working out to go, okay, this is visible and this is visible and this is visible as it moves. So that's a little segue and a difference between Kamishibai, where Kamishibai is a little bit easier than Crankies, but you can help yourself and make it a little bit more like a butai as you go. Perhaps you might be able to take photographs and print them onto paper. Or as we saw with Sue Truman's work, perhaps you can sew, or you could do collage. You can sew things. Make those beautiful quilted Crankies. There are so many different ways of making a Cranky, which I guess is the same as Kamishibai. Kamishibai, you need to watch out for how easily you can whip it out of your butai, depending on how fast you need to whip it out. It needs to be strong enough in both cases, but yeah, you could do all sorts of things in Kamishibai. And a look at the World Kamishibai Forum archives shows you some amazing examples of different kinds of techniques that can be used there. Now, Susie Snail here, she's come to help out Cranky Duck because she wants to say, people are going to be asking, how long is a Cranky scroll? How long is it? Well, you don't have to make a 3-mile long Cranky scroll, but how long it is dependent not just on the story itself, how long is the story, but it is also dependent on your pacing. And Susie Snail wants to just tell you many, many times over that the pacing of your Cranky is very much going to influence how much scroll you need. For example, if I were doing a chase scene through a forest, I might be cranking fast, in which case I need a lot of forest to be going past. Whereas if it's that lullaby and we see Cranky Duck on the waters in the moonlight, well, then we can be a bit slower and more gentle. So the pacing of your story, says Susie Snail, is going to influence the length of your story scroll. Uh-oh. What material should you make a story scroll out of? There's no wrong or right answer to this. as you saw from even the still panorama images, the panoramic painting, it takes a lot of a beating, and a moving panorama, a cranky, you need something that can scroll into tiny little cylinders at either end and then stretch out and then scroll again. Now, every material you might try will have different benefits and different costs. And I can only really encourage you to try experimentation. Paper, for example, might rip, but actually paper you can stick together more easily. So it has an inherent problem, but it also has an easier solution depending on what you're going to use for sticking. Glue is another cranky nightmare where you've really got to experiment with glues. You can see folding over corners, you've got to make sure the glue can be flexible enough to be curled up and stretched out. Fabric, sewing is fantastic. You get beautiful flexibility, but sometimes that flexibility can lead to drooping, and you need to do things like hold the handles taut so that you avoid some of that drooping fabric in the middle, or restrict the size of your cranky. So every material you might choose to use has its own benefits, its own costs, and problems that you'll work out along the way. But there are so many possibilities, so many options, that hopefully you might find something that will help you to not just end your journey, to start a journey. Perhaps you might make your own. It's achievable, it's tricky, and the process we were just discussing before the meeting started itself, that doing a rough copy, I think, of a cranky is very, very valuable with anyone, a work in progress, because you can see that pacing is so important to your scroll, and what you see, how long it goes, and yeah. So anyway, so a rough copy, very, very important, and it's much easier to stick up and correct a draft. Kamishibai, you can whip a card in, whip a card out, add an extra card, or change one card, and you're only changing one card. This is an amazing luxury of Kamishibai. You can change a card. If it doesn't work, you can change that one card. If you have a scene that doesn't work in a story scroll, which is 12 meters long, then changing that is more difficult, and you have to problem solve a lot with joining and what have you. So there we have our Cranky Duck scroll. And hopefully, one of the reasons why I like this one is because it really is about showing it can be simple. It doesn't have to be impressive, and you can see just by watching the information. I was doing a lot of talking, but there's a lot of information that you can see by the doing of it. Now I did when I was doing this, I did try. That speaking of trial and error, I did try a thing where it was like, oh, look, it's the beginning. It's not the end, it's the beginning, because there's also shadow crankies, but I don't think that's very successful. But I just wanted to show you, actually, because by doing that, I learned that it doesn't work. I glued on the back here, I glued lighting gel. But I used, there's lighting gel and contact. The contact shows through very clearly. The lighting gel doesn't show very clearly, even if I get a good light back there. It's not that clear. And the cost is that it's made the front here very, very wibbly because of the glue attaching it securely enough. So I would have not bothered. I'm just showing you because I just want to show you. Trial and error, experiment, learn stuff. The gel did not meet very well with this material that I used for the cranky scroll, and I would say not successful. Could be successful on another form using different glue, but every time the same, I think, with Kamishibai, and the same with Crankies. Every time you try something, you learn something. There'll be different lessons in every creative project that you do. Now, speaking of creative projects. Oh, do we have any quick questions
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jill, that was fantastic. We have so many positive comments and hearts and things in the chat. I just wanted to share with you. Lovely. That was wonderful. Thank you, Jill. Inspiring and open to so much creativity. So, I just wanted to take a moment to say that. And also, I'm really struck by we talked about this, but the rhythm in Cranky is so important, and also in Kamishibai, but I think the rhythm and the way of creating rhythm is different. So you'll be sharing some examples of that in a moment. I just want to check quickly if there are any pressing questions before you go on. People can use the raise hand function, or Jackie.
Can't hear you, Jackie.
There we are. Jill, I was Googling as soon as you said it. Can you explain what is lighting gel?
Gel, these are very out of fashion now with lights in theatre going the way that they're going, where there's much more automation. But back in the olden days, Jackie, the olden theatre days, the lighting gels where you'd have a hot light shining onto a stage, and you'd change the colour of that light by putting in a piece of gel, this material, and it would change the color. So I've actually bought some of that, and I use it in a sort of a shadow screen sometimes if I'm doing almost like a Kamishibai style shadow sort of thing where I've just got a single scene and shadow puppets on the back. I might use that because I feel I'm quite an anxious person, and I quite like it. It's designed to be heat resistant. It's designed to deal with hot theatre lights. Now, of course, now we don't really have lights that run that hot. And me at home, I'm not going to be using a light that runs that hot. But yeah, I just expect that everything will go wrong. And so I've got the theatre gel. So, but you don't have to. I think nowadays you could get, it's just that safety awareness, being aware of how hot your lighting is going to be and what that will do to your materials. You don't want to start a fire, and you might be dealing with paper. And actually, I just want to quickly show, for this scroll, I did a rough copy on just baking paper because it's really cheap. So I just got from the supermarket some baking paper, and I did it with a felt tip pen, a permanent marker. It doesn't look very good when you do, but it's not for that. It's for scrolling it through. I'll just see if I've got it over here. It's for scrolling through, and then when you think you've run out, or you think you'll have enough, you can see how badly that shows. But for a rough draft, to get the pacing right, to go, oh, actually, I need to stick that there. It's terrible for sticking together. So I have done some things where I've added stuff onto the end and added stuff with paper where I thought I needed extra stuff. But the sticky tape doesn't go very well with baking paper. In fact, it's fallen off. I can't show you because it fell off. But what I used for the scroll itself is freezer paper. And this freezer paper it's a paper. On one side it is quite sealed, and the other side you can draw onto it and get quite a clear mark. You might find it if you can find it online, that's great. You might find it in places where quilters go, because it's all pattern makers. So people make patterns on it too. And you can shine light through it, and it is one of the materials. That's what that was made out of anyway. I just thought I'd give you a little behind the scenes of that one.
You.
Right.
Yeah, so let's move on to your Cranky and then your Kamishibai.
Yeah, so as Tara was saying, I'm just going to do a bit of a clumsy setup here, but as Tara was saying, really, they're very, sometimes just watching the example, you can see there, I've got, just going to try and see what can be seen. Are we all right here? Do I need to go a bit higher? Oh, I think that's the highest my stage can go. All right, and I'm going to light from the back. So this one This one is very much that Cranky Duck one was made for Zoom, so it sort of works quite well on Zoom. This one was very, very much made for a live performance. So during a live performance, what I would do with this is I would actually be telling the story, and I play a steel tongue drum. And a steel tongue drum is it's a pentatonic instrument, which is almost wind chimey, and it's quite gentle and relaxing of a sound. It's not a percussive drum, you know, in a rhythmic, I don't use it rhythmically, really. But it's very good at being sort of a lyrical sound. You can do rising seas, and you can do, you know, angry creatures, and have a little motif of home and then coming back home at the end. But it is an instrument that sounds appalling on Zoom. It doesn't matter what you do with your settings, it's just terrible. So I'm not going to be using that, and I would have somebody else cranking the handles. But I just wanted to say that this is very much a live thing. And we're doing an adaptation for Zoom here today. But the reason why I want to do that is because I think it talks about some of the rhythms. It is a good story for using as a cranky, and I think it works better. You could do this story in Kamishibai form, but I think it works better as a cranky form. And really, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and the point is to really show that yeah, some stories really lend themselves to one form or another. All right. This story is called The Faithful Fisherman of Burano. Burano is an island city in the Venice Lagoon. Perhaps some of you have been there on a trip. Maybe you visited one of the little museums, or strolled past the very colourful houses they have there, or had your photo taken in front of the leaning bell tower there of San Martino. But before it was a tourist centre, it was a humble fishing village. And once upon a time, there was a fisherman. And he decided on this particular day that he would take his little boat out of the protective waters of the Venice Lagoon and into the deep waters of the sea. He did this because he was soon to be married, and he wanted a great big catch. He wanted to start his married life with prosperity and plenty. Now, he expected when he got into these unprotected waters that the swell would rise and rock his little boat, and so it did. However, something strange started to happen, something a little more unnerving, because the swell stopped. And I don't mean it reduced, I mean it completely stopped, and his tiny boat was utterly still in the water in a way he had never before experienced. Worse still was a sinking sensation he had that there was something lurking in the waters beneath his tiny boat out at sea, when pop! A face breached the surface of the water. And then another, and another. And he soon realised that his tiny boat was surrounded by mermaids, singing and playing. Come to the sea, the water's fine. Come with me, for you are mine. They sang as their skin glistened in the sunlight. They splashed and laughed and smiled with their coral pink lips. Come with me, waters fine, come to the sea, for you are mine. But the fisherman, just as he felt himself compelled almost to go into the waters, he thought of his beloved waiting back at home. His hand brushed against the net that she herself had woven for him, and he thought, I cannot come into these waters. I will not come into these waters. I belong to somebody else. The mermaids were not impressed. Come to the sea, the water's fine. Come with me, for you are mine. The mermaids swam around his boat, swimming whirlpools, and he clutched the side of his boat for dear life, and he thought to himself, if I am going to die this day, then I will die with my beloved in my heart and with a prayer on my lips. And suddenly, the whirlpools abated and the singing stopped. He heard another voice, more beautiful, more ancient, saying, what is your secret, fisherman? My secret? What is your secret? How is it that you have managed to resist where so many have failed the siren song of my sisters? Well, the fisherman felt as if secrets were being pulled from him, but he was a simple man and he had none. And he just told her that he was soon to be married. He saw as he opened his eyes that it was none other than the queen of the mermaids herself. I'm soon to be married. I already belong to somebody. That is my secret, such as it is. Well, the Queen of the Mermaids was very impressed with his faithful heart. I shall give you a gift, she said. And before his eyes, she seemed to weave together the bubbles of the foam, the surface of the water that had been so thoroughly beaten by her sisters' tails, and she wove them into a fabric so fine and said, take this as a bridal gift to your soon-to-be wife. May your marriage be long and happy. Well, the fisherman did not wait. He raced back home as quickly as he could, and he told his beloved that while he had no fish, he was so sorry. He wanted to be prosperous, but he had this gift. She said, soon we will have 2 hands, husband-to-be, and with those 2 hands we can make prosperity twice as much together. And she was amazed at the gift of the mermaid. She wore it on her wedding day as a bridal veil. She wasn't the only one who was amazed. The entire town came out to look and see this miraculously fine substance, this cloth, well, the women of the town of Burano were very, very impressed indeed, and they were very industrious and hardworking by nature themselves, and they thought to themselves, this is so beautiful, so fine, surely we can replicate this somehow. And so these women, experienced in weaving nets, they looked at the fabric and they tried this, they tried that. They experimented and made many mistakes along the way, but eventually they created something that brought prosperity not just to the fisherman and his bride, but the whole town of Burano. Because Burano became a centre for lace making for the whole of Europe, so that they could all live happily ever after, thanks to the faithful heart of a fisherman, to the magic of the Queen of the Mermaids, and to the hard-working women of the town. That is, yeah, so the The shadowing doesn't work so well here because you've got to do front light to get the zoom in, but you can see a little bit that shadow is much easier to use. I've got secret ambitions to maybe do some kind of shadow cranking at some point, Kamishibai rather, but you can see it's much easier, and a lot of people do shadow crankies. So yes, shadow. There's my shadow cranky, or my cranky that I also do bits of shadow work with. And you can see how I've really borrowed their the idea of travel. There's a lot of travel that happens, and all these old moving panoramas. It's a little bit like going on a tour without leaving your home, and so I've tried to get a little aspect of that in as you go, and again that water, to me, water journeys, all those old. I'm just getting rid of that light. All of those old crankies with ocean voyages and Arctic voyages and things. You can see how there's something about that cranking motion that has that whoosh of waves, that rhythm of the sea. So I think it sort of, that's why I showed you that story, because that story is suitable for its form. Now,
Yeah, Jill, I'd just like to say, seeing the whole performance of that, what really struck me too, and we can talk about this with the Kamishibai, but I think like in the Kamishibai dojos, we've talked a lot about how it's so important with Kamishibai to have a lot of dialogue and much less narration. But I think with Cranky, because it is a slow unfolding, you have time for the narration in a different way. So that is really interesting to see.
and I think that with this story scroll, there's one bit where I think it would really work better on Kamishibai, and that is the mermaid's head popping out of the water. It's hard to pop,
Right.
and you were talking, Tara, about that lending in the Kamishibais come with this language of cinema, edits, cuts, change. It's faster. You can do speed. Quick changes more easily with Kamishibai, whereas with Crankies, there are times I'm covering with words what the scroll cannot do very easily.
Right. And I think that's why you don't really have the space to use as much narration, because you're doing these quick changes. It has to more focus on the dialogue, and yeah, so that's interesting.
Yes. Well, to contrast, I'm a more experienced cranky person than I am a Kamishibai person, but I just thought that I would do a little work in progress snippet. I do have another story I could have done, but I think that actually this other story I was thinking of doing, it could be a cranky. It's one of these ones where this one would be a terrible cranky, whereas the other one, sorry, I'm just moving my setup here so I can fit. It's only so much space. Yeah, so I think this would be a terrible cranky, and I think that cranky story works better as a cranky than it would as a Kamishibai. So I just thought a little example, and we're just going to do a little part of this so that we've got time for questions and discussions afterwards. And also it is very, very, very much a work in progress. And as is my butai. And yeah, let's give it a go, and then we can talk about it afterwards. All right, everybody. Now, I have a story inside butai, and this story is a story that comes from my country, Australia. Now, I don't know how much you know about Australia, but if there is one thing you know, then I suspect what you know is that Australia is a country of great danger. Yes, we've got floods, we've got bushfires, humans drop bears, there's much danger. And this story is a story of one of Australia's most dangerous animals. I wonder if you know what animal the story might be about. Perhaps you're thinking it might be a story about a spider. like the Sydney funnel web. Oh, the Sydney funnel web, it is a very venomous spider and quite common around Sydney, which I live close to Sydney, and I have indeed had my own encounter with a funnel web spider trying to have a shower with me. Neither of us were very impressed, I can tell you, that day. But no, it's not a story about spiders. I wonder if you know what else it could be in a story. Is it a story about a crocodile or something different? No. It is not a story about the fearsome saltwater crocodile that can grow bigger than your car, longer than your car. It's not about the inland taipan, which is shockingly venomous, but actually quite rare and quite shy. And it's not even about the eastern brown snake here, much more common near populated areas and much more grumpy by nature. It's not a story about a crocodile. It's not a story about a snake. Dun 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 dun. No, it's not even one of our marine creatures. It's not a story about a shark or a stonefish or a blue ring octopus or a cone snail or geographer's cone here or a box jellyfish or any of these other massively dangerous sea creatures. No, it is not about any of those. This is a story about Australia's most dangerous bird, the cassowary. It looks a little bit like a dinosaur, I think. And this is a story about a southern cassowary. Southern cassowaries live in the far north parts of tropical Australia. And also you can find them in the south parts of Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, a bit of Malaysia. These animals are truly, truly remarkable. They're a flightless bird, and they are what's called a keystone species in a rainforest. They eat lots of different fruits in the rainforest, some quite rare, some that are really quite toxic to other animals such as humans. But a cassowary's tough guts takes those fruits, partially digests them, and then spreads the seed far and wide. And it's really important to that rainforest habitat. And you can see that the cassowary is very, very tall. This cassowary is sort of standing up like that. And when they're at their full height, they can be between 150 to maybe up to 200 centimetres. That's 5 to 6'6". And here we have a storyteller who's about 165 centimetres, you know. So to give you a comparison, storyteller to cassowary, they might be a bit shorter than me, but they could also be taller than me. And they weigh less or more than me, 40 to 75 kilograms, and they can run fast too. They're not the fastest bird in the world, but they can run up to 50 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour. And something that I think makes them extra dinosaurish are these amazing 3-clawed toes that they have, or feet that they have. And their inner toe, their claw there, is long and blade-like, and you know, bigger than velociraptors. So an amazing bird. And this story is a story about not just any southern cassowary. This is a story about Gary. G'day, g'day. Gary was a young male cassowary. Yep. And Gary had just established his own territory. Yes, we're an isolated sort of a bird. We like to keep ourselves to ourselves and have our own space. And Gary was patrolling his territory one day when he noticed that something that was faster than he was, stronger than he was, and bigger than he was had entered his territory. It was Sherry Cassowary. Oh, g'day. Gary, was it? Oh, you're magnificent. Yes, well, my name is Sherry. Nice to meet you. I like what you've done to the place. Or you could stay here if you wanted. Oh, look, Gary, I'm only passing through. I'm only here for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks. Sherry, a couple of weeks with you would give me memories that would last a lifetime. Well, Gary was smitten. He absolutely adored Sherry, as most female cassowaries. She was taller than he was, than the male. And when she left, this magnificent bird, when she left, she didn't just leave Gary with an ache in his heart. She also left 1, 2, 3, 4. Or actually, I don't quite know what they are, but they're beautiful. They're beautiful. It's a treasure. They're my gems. I'll guard them forever, Sherry, said Gary, as he admired his new treasure, this precious treasure that Sherry had left him. These amazingly, vibrantly green orbs or gems or jewels. Well, true to his word, Gary had a new-found purpose. Protect the gems. He protected them from greedy goannas. He protected them from slithering snakes. And when that most destructive creature, the feral pig, invaded his territory, whah! He got his patented cassowary kick happening until that pig was squealing, "And don't come back!" Ha! He protected them with passion and commitment. Even when he was so exhausted, he had to rest. He protected those gems with his body. But one day, after about 50 days of 50 nights of renewed purpose, something terrible happened. One of the gems had a crack in it. Gary was appalled. But then it got worse. Another gem cracked and another. They were all starting to break. Now Gary had no idea. I don't know what's happening. Who's doing this? Who's doing this? Who's causing this? Who? Who is it? Who is it? I need to know. What's happening? What's going on? Why are they breaking? Help me! Because there was no obvious sign, no obvious reason. And all Gary could do was yell out in despair, and there are no words that I can use to really capture what Gary was saying. His low, rumbling growl shook the wet floor of that tropical rainforest and echoed through his large territory and expressed such anguish, such panic, such fear, and such despair. It would have shaken your heart as well. And then things got worse as the gems started to pulsate and started to burst open. And soon, oh my goodness, Sherry, I knew you'd left me with a treasure. I just could never have imagined something as precious as this. Oh, Sherry, I'm a dad. If you thought that Gary had had a purpose in life before, well, you should have seen him now. Whoosh! He was double on action. He was kicking away the snakes, guarding from the goannas and frightening off those bush pigs. But now, instead of protecting something that just stayed still, he was protecting 4 curious chicks. What's this, Dad? Hey, Dad, what's goes... I don't know. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should go over here. Dad, over this way. Oh, he was exhausted. Now, if he thought he'd known what exhaustion was before... And I'm going to stop it now because that's as far as we got in the story. That's my work in progress and story. But you can see that there's nothing about the rhythms of this story that would really fit in cranky form. It's just not a story that really lends itself. So it's only a cranky story. It's got partial pulls, it's got fast pulls, it's got zooming in quickly, zooming out. Does Sherry come back? Joe, I'll give you the potted because I've my friend, in honor of Kieran Shah, I'll actually do you the quick end of the story, which is basically Gary realizes he keeps on trying to protect these chicks who keep on wanting to explore, and he realizes in the end that to keep them safe, he can't keep them in. He's got to teach them what he knows. So he teaches them about the rainforest fruits and where to find water. And one day when he's showing them about guarding his territory, he gets to a beach and he sees a male cassowary in the distance. And he's concerned at first because it's a male cassowary coming onto his territory. But then he realizes it's a very familiar male. And in actual fact, that was his dad who had raised him, because in cassowaries, it's the males who raise the chicks to adulthood. And he, from a distance, a respectful distance, Gary's dad gives him a little nod as if to say, well done, son. I'm proud of you. And that's the end of the story. So that is to come. And no, Sherry doesn't come back this year. Sherry might come back in a couple of years when she's ready for another few special weeks with Gary. But yeah, it's a story that I came up with for Father's Day, because I thought we don't really have Father's Day stories that much, and I thought this is an animal where the fathers are the really active parents, and they do teach the chicks. And so yes, so there you are. I was thinking of you, Tara, as well. I thought it's a father's story, but it's also a parenting story where, you know, we've all felt, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh no, I thought I knew what tired was before, but now I'm really tired. Am I ruining them? Is everything going wrong? Well, maybe that's just me and my parenting. So yeah, and that I thought that I would really now welcome up any questions or a little discussion or chat. I just thought that having two sort of examples of a story for Cranky and a story for Kamishibai, where they're really clear examples of this works best in this form, that works best in that form, would actually show by doing more than me just saying those words.
I love that. You have so many really positive comments in the chat. Everybody loved the story. And I will copy that for you. Yeah, there's so I visited the island in October. How wonderful to see it again, says Karen Kirsting. Oh, this was for your earlier story. Delightful. Yeah, I was impressed by the synchronization between storytelling, scrolling, and variations in rhythms and intensity. Yeah, everyone just says amazing. I love it. Wonderful. And this is such a great contrast. So if I want to welcome other people to ask questions, but one question I have is just how did you think of these differently as you were preparing them?
With the Burano story, I had initially thought, I was sort of very inspired by people like Catherine Fay and Sue Truman. And I was thinking, I love cloth stories, and I was really thinking that I was going to very much make a cloth-based collage-y kind of Cranky scroll, but then I just didn't go that way. It just didn't happen. I used real lace at the end because it was all happening when my auntie, who was a quilter and was a crafts person, very much she died. And I guess in my heart was my auntie and this idea of the industrious women, the women who work things out and make this creativity. That's, you know, for me, that's where that story came from. It has a folk tale, and I've borrowed different snippets. I wanted something to do with the creation of some kind of folk form. Some people say the story was actually early advertising. You know, when lace, it was a very expensive commodity, And as it started to go out of fashion, well, but it's from the mermaids, and there are lots of different stories. There are a few different stories, but they're relatively recent stories. But yes, so thank you I'm glad you were moved. I'm now starting to read the chat as well. So yes, so that to me was about creativity. It was about materials. I wanted objects and the making, and I guess to me it's the joy of making and the creativity of making something. And I did want a story that had that journey. It was very much about that ocean rhythm and that traveling aspect. So that appealed. I also wanted a very simple story. It is actually quite a short story. It's literally fisherman goes out, meets mermaids, doesn't get lured into the water, and gets rewarded with lace, takes it home, gets married, everyone goes, woo, and then makes lace. It's a very simple story because I wanted there to be space. As a live performance, there's space for music. You can imagine a sort of a rolling music, and then magical tinkly sounds while the lace is being made, and then a theme for when you set out and you're coming from home, and a theme for when you arrive back home that relates to each other. You can feel how the music would also add to that rhythm. So yeah, I was looking for actually a very simple story, so I could allow the medium to make that rhythm, that gentle rhythm, that lullaby feel almost. So that was quite a deliberate choice. Not all stories that are in a cranky have to be that. As I say, you could have chase scenes. There's not a problem with that. It's a lot of cranky making work. And you've got to watch the material there. This material that I've used here is actually rolls of canvas. So yeah, rolls of canvas that I've gotten as cheaply as I could online, and that's the material there, and acrylic paint. Yeah, and where this one, yes, I was looking. I just wanted a Father's Day story. I thought it's nearly Father's Day. I thought I could make it ready for Father's Day, which is absolutely wildly was never going to happen when I started thinking of it. But in any way, you can have an idea, and eventually it'll come good if it's meant to be. So yeah, I just wanted a Father's Day story, and I also wanted an Australian story, and so I think yeah, that was just an Australian Father's Day story, and that's just what came out. And I thought I wanted to make it a Scottish storyteller friend of mine, Alastair McIver. He hates the way dads are represented as bumbling, but I actually wanted to. So every time I've thought about it as a parent story, because it actually expresses my anxieties as a parent and my fears that I'm doing it all wrong and my attempts to keep kids safe and all of these things. So yeah, so those are the things that I had in my mind: Australian story, Father's Day story, and that expressed the fears of a parent.
Yeah, I really enjoyed seeing it because when we talked about this program, you shared an earlier iteration of it, and it's really improved and become so much more dramatic since then. So it was fun to see how you continued to develop it. One thing that I thought was really interesting, and I think it has a lot of opportunity for participatory Kamishibai. You're showing little bits of animals, like what is this? And they could say, oh, it's a crocodile or something, where you're doing that introduction. And you're talking about the most dangerous animal. But I think we kind of skipped over what makes him dangerous a little bit. You have that scene where you're talking about he's tall and he has claws, but it might be fun to have. So what do you think is the most dangerous thing about him? And then maybe the audience could say, his claws, and you could have a scene where he's kicking or whatever it is that he does that is particularly dangerous, to tie it into that introduction.
Maybe, yes, maybe I need to do like a close up of the claw coming out, shing.
Yeah, can you imagine if you were close to him and suddenly, you know, he has his claws? Yeah, something like that would tie in the dangerousness, and then how he uses that to protect his children is lovely.
And now with Kamishibai, this is not a cranky scroll. With Kamishibai, I can immediately take that feedback and I can think to myself, okay, well, I think that around about once we've got goannas and the pigs and whatever, we get to this scroll, and then I can make a whole new card, slot it in, and it's shing, it's the claw really close up with a, maybe a kapow sort of marks around it. I can do that
Exactly.
so easily. It's a separate card.
Mhm.
If it's a cranky scroll and it's the end product, then I have all of the trouble of going, okay, how do I link it up? How am I going to do a join? When it comes to joining two different scrolls or materials together, you might need to think about, or do I have it? People joke about putting a tree there so that you've got a tree there, and that's where your join is along the mark of the. I've joined several in the mermaid story. I've joined several scrolls there, and I did a very involved process with tendrils of mermaid hair being where the joins are, but I'm not really happy with that. But it also, because there is a shadow aspect, it had to make visual sense to have two layers together, so it needed that sort of, it was the lurking mermaid hair and then the hair turning into waves the other side. It had to make a shadow sense as well to have joins. So yeah, it's a that's another difference between Kamishibai and Crankies. It's just much easier to change small bits of a Kamishibai.
Yeah, it was lovely. The rhythm and the different textures of the hair and everything is beautiful. So does anybody else have any questions? We have a couple more minutes left. And
Jackie.
Jackie.
Uh,
Oh,
Jill, I was intrigued by your light. What sort of light do you use that doesn't create a hot spot? And I saw it was on a gooseneck.
look, I actually love this. I think there's a Judith Hope is a puppeteer in, I think it was her, in the UK, and she just would do this, and you can get lots of fabulous information from Richard Bradshaw's book. But this here, I got from another storyteller or puppeteer, and it's an IKEA lamp. It's just quite a cheap IKEA one. It's great because it clips on. Okay, so it's like a bedside lamp from IKEA. It's cheap, it's easy. I have to angle it so that you don't get that bright spot. That can still happen, that flare. This is not really, my cranky is not really a shadow cranky. It only gets shadowy in one sort of bit. Um, it's just to give it a little bit of extra zing lighting it from behind, and to allow me to have that little extra shadow bit. So I would have to see how it would go, but I'm quite happy with it. And it's easy in Australia, easy to access and pretty cheap. And it's just a bedside light clip on from IKEA.
Okay, we have another question from Magana. I'm sorry, I don't know your first name.
Yeah, hi Tara, and I just recently got your book from
Oh,
Ramya Srinathi ma'am.
thank
That and Jill, I was in tears listening to your entire, I mean, just beautiful. And I am also a budding storyteller. I'm a learner at heart, and of course, I've been doing storytelling, and again, I think we are always going to be learners. So my question to you is that, you know, how so I'm also a teacher, so I'm into teaching primarily, and then I'm building this muscle of integrating more storytelling into teaching. How long does it take to develop a story like this? So while integrating, where visual art, the music, and everything, how do we develop that practice? Like, it's like that muscle. How much of effort and what do we have to do on a daily basis? Because it can't be like a one-off thing, once in 6 months, motivation strikes and I am doing a story, and then for 5 months I'm off. Like, and then what is the frequency? I'm really curious to know that.
Well, I think the answer is going to be different for everyone. And for me, something, Tara touched on this, something that I find incredibly valuable is deadlines. I need a deadline or nothing gets done. Now, obviously, if you're in the process, then having some kind of deadline to something that is not a final outcome is vitally important. Tara mentioned the dojos that the World Kamishibai Forum has. So that is an environment where you can show a work in progress or practice something that you're new at, so that you can book in to be a participant in a dojo, and that's your deadline. Now you have to commit. You've committed. You have to make sure you've got in the chat the dates there. You have to commit to doing it, and then you've got a very concrete one. But it's not polished for end performance. It's a work showing to get feedback and to get response and to practice in front of a very supportive audience. I'm also part of the Australian Storytellers, New South Wales. We have a Blue Mountain Story Circle, and we have that's a very informal storytellers online get together. And I have like Veena, who's here today. She is one of the people who have seen like these stories in process. So having a storytelling meeting that I'm going to, where the outcome is, it's all about process, it's about showing works in progress, it's about seeking advice and input from others, having that where you're not expected to have a polished performance, it's still a very useful deadline. And I really think for me, it's about having deadlines, and then I work towards that deadline in a state of panic. I don't feel like I'm not amazingly wise about this. I need a deadline, and preferably mini deadlines first, and then an end product deadline.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
for that segue
thank
into mentioning the dojos, Jill, because I think that they are a really great option to have a deadline and have an audience that's just very understanding and constructive and informed. And I've learned so much from what I've shared in the dojos and from everyone who's shared. So I hope you will sign up, Meghana,
Yes,
as you
yes,
work on your
thank you.
stories.
Thank you. Yes,
Okay,
thank
well,
you.
thank you, everyone. I'm going to remove Spotlight for a moment just to see if there are any other hands raised. And I think we all want to thank Jill for this really incredible presentation. It's so inspiring. I want to make crankies. We're all going to want to make crankies now and combine them with Kamishibai and who knows. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our future events. So please stay tuned, and we will be in touch.